You know, for a long time, I thought peace was something you faked at family dinners, or something you had to convince yourself was real because admitting otherwise felt too heavy. Not anymore. Not since the divorce. My name is David, and for the last year and a half, my life has been quiet. Really, truly quiet. I work at a museum in a small town in Washington state, restoring pottery that's been shattered for centuries. I piece together fragments that archaeologists dig up from ancient sites. And that work teaches you something profound: patience. It teaches you that some things can be saved, and some things just can't. You need to recognize the difference before you waste years trying to glue together something that will never hold. My marriage to Sarah taught me the same lesson, just the hard way. She cheated on me with a guy named Jason from the physical therapy clinic where she worked. When she left, there was no apology, no begging, no remorse. She just packed her stuff into Jason's truck and said she needed to explore her feelings. My parents were actually there that day. They watched her load boxes into another man's vehicle, and instead of supporting me, my mom told me marriage was complicated, and my dad asked what I'd done to drive her to that point. I pointed out she was literally leaving me for someone else, and they looked at me like I was being dramatic. They stayed in touch with Sarah after the divorce. My mom would mention her casually at family dinners, as if Sarah hadn't walked out on 7 years of marriage without a backward glance. The settlement gave her half our savings. She left me Cooper, our dog, because Jason was allergic. Then, 6 months later, she dumped Cooper at a shelter because Jason apparently changed his mind and wanted to try allergy medication. I found out from a mutual friend, went and got Cooper back, and now he sleeps at the foot of my bed in the small 1950s house I bought after the divorce. It's got hardwood floors that creak in all the right places. Weekends, I refinish furniture in my garage, listening to jazz, sanding down old chairs. And that's where I found my real peace. The kind where you wake up on a Saturday morning without a stone of dread sitting in your chest. Last week, I was out in the garage, lost in the rhythm of sanding an old wooden stool, jazz playing low, Cooper asleep in his corner. Then I heard a car door slam outside. I wasn't expecting anyone. I don't get visitors. I like it that way. I turned off the sander and walked to the front window. That's when I saw her. Sarah. Standing on my porch, holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 3. And pulling into my driveway, right behind them, was my parents' car. My mom got out, holding a casserole dish like she was arriving at a potluck. My dad adjusted his jacket, like he was about to give a speech. I just stood there, trying to process what I was seeing. Sarah looked thinner, exhausted. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. The little girl, Chloe, clung to her leg, looking around like she didn't understand where she was or why. I opened the door before they could even knock. Didn't say a word. Just waited. My mom flashed that controlling smile of hers and held up the casserole. "Sweetheart, just hear her out," she said. Sarah finally looked at me. Jason had left. She'd made mistakes. She was behind on rent. Lost her job. Chloe needed stability. She said, "We were good once. You were a good man." She didn't have anywhere else to go. My dad stepped forward, putting his hand on my shoulder. "You're a reasonable person, David. You're a good man," he said, and my mom nodded enthusiastically. "You have a house. You're doing well. You could help." Chloe was staring at me with these big brown eyes. She had no idea what was happening. She was just being dragged into the wreckage of adult decisions she didn't make. That's when it hit me. They didn't come because Sarah wanted forgiveness. They came because they needed a solution. Sarah's life had fallen apart, and instead of helping her themselves, instead of letting her face the consequences of leaving her marriage for another man, they decided to make it my problem. They decided that because I have a house, a stable job, and because I didn't burn my life down chasing feelings, I should absorb the fallout of her choices. My mom wasn't holding a casserole, she was holding a bribe. My dad wasn't offering support, he was handing me a script he expected me to follow. Sarah wasn't asking for help, she was asking me to be the backup plan I never agreed to be. I looked at all three of them standing on my porch. I looked at that little girl who deserved so much better than this, and I said one word, no. My mom's face went blank. My dad started to say something. Sarah's mouth opened like she was going to argue, and I stepped back and closed the door. I locked it. I walked back to the garage, turned the jazz back on, and picked up the sander. Behind me, I could hear them talking. My mom's voice got louder. Sarah was crying. My dad was knocking harder. I didn't move. They stood out there for maybe 15 minutes, maybe longer. Then I heard car doors slam, engines start, and the sound of them driving away. I sat down on my workbench. Cooper, who'd woken up, stared at me like he was waiting for an explanation. I realized my hands had stopped shaking. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. This was me finally recognizing that some people will watch you break and then hand you the pieces like it's your responsibility to fix them. I walked inside, opened my laptop, and created a new document titled Actions. Change locks. Install security cameras. Block all phone numbers. Email lawyer. Update emergency contacts. Revise will. I sat there looking at that list, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. Like I was making decisions based on what I needed, instead of what other people expected from me. My mom called that night at 9:30. I was already in bed, reading, Cooper curled up next to me. I watched her name light up my phone 3 times before it went to voicemail. She called again at 10 o'clock. Then my dad called at 10:15. The notifications piled up like snow in a storm. The next morning, I had 6 voicemails and 14 text messages. My mom's messages were all in that same disappointed tone, saying we needed to talk like adults, that I was being unreasonable and cruel. My dad's voicemails were shorter, just him saying my name and asking me to call back. But there was an edge in his voice I'd never heard before, something sharp and angry underneath the surface. I screenshotted every message. I saved every voicemail. Put them all in a folder on my laptop labeled documentation. Then I blocked both their numbers. I blocked Sarah's number. And I went to work like it was just another day. By Thursday, the calls started coming from numbers I didn't recognize. My Aunt Carol left a message saying I was being cruel, that a little girl needed help, and I was turning my back on family. A number with a different area code called, and a woman I didn't know said she was a friend of Sarah's and I should be ashamed of myself for abandoning a child. I didn't answer any of them. I just kept screenshotting, kept saving, kept documenting every single attempt at contact. At work, my boss, Michael, pulled me aside during lunch and asked if everything was okay at home. He said I seemed distracted. I told him everything was fine, just dealing with some family boundary issues, and it was handled. He nodded and didn't push. Michael's good like that, he doesn't pry. Friday morning, 6:35 a.m., I was making coffee when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw my parents' car. I watched my dad get out and walk up to my porch with this determined stride. Watched him try the door handle like he genuinely thought it might be unlocked. My mom got out and stood behind him, holding her phone like she was about to call me. I just stood there, drinking my coffee, watching them through the window. My dad knocked loud, the kind of knock that says, "Open this door right now." I didn't move. He knocked again, called my name with that edge in his voice, even sharper now. My mom walked up and pressed her face against the window, trying to see inside. I stayed perfectly still in the kitchen where they couldn't see me. They stood there for 15 minutes, trying different approaches, calling, knocking, checking the side gate, then they finally gave up and left. I waited until their car disappeared down the street. Then I called a locksmith and scheduled him for that afternoon. I ordered security cameras online, the kind with cloud storage and motion alerts that would record everything. Paid extra for next day delivery. Monday morning, I had a meeting with my lawyer, Arthur, the same guy who handled my divorce. He's the kind of person who doesn't smile much but gets things done efficiently and thoroughly. I brought my laptop. Showed him the documentation folder, everything organized by date and type. He actually whistled when he saw how meticulously I'd kept records. "You don't mess around," he said. I told him I'd learned from the divorce to document everything, to never assume people will be reasonable or honest. He went through the voicemails, the text messages, the screenshots from unknown numbers, and leaned back in his chair with a look of professional satisfaction. "This is textbook harassment. We can absolutely work with this." I paid him an $800 retainer and left his office feeling like I'd just put on armor. Like I finally had someone in my corner who understood what I was dealing with. The security cameras arrived Tuesday, and I installed them myself that evening. Small units mounted under the eaves, not obvious unless you were specifically looking for them. Wednesday afternoon, they caught my parents coming back. I was at the hardware store buying sandpaper when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app and watched in real time as they walked up to my porch, knocked, waited, looked around, confused about why I wasn't answering, then finally left. They had no idea they were being recorded, and I saved every second of that footage to my laptop, added it to the documentation folder with a timestamp and notes. Thursday morning, I got a call from Michael at work. He sounded uncomfortable, apologetic. "Sarah came to the lobby asking for you," he said. I could hear the unspoken question in his voice, though what's going on here he was too polite to ask directly. I told him if she came back to call the police. I told him I had a lawyer involved, and this was officially a harassment situation. He was quiet for a second, then said, "Understood." That was it. No judgment, no questions. I called Brenda in HR after lunch, explained the situation without going into unnecessary details, and she added Sarah to a restricted visitors list. She said if Sarah showed up again, security would escort her out immediately. She said, "This kind of thing happens more than people think," and I felt grateful she didn't make me explain the whole messy history. Friday, I found a card wedged in my front door. My security footage showed my mom's car pulling up at 7 that morning, showed her getting out alone, looking around nervously, then tucking something into the doorframe before driving away quickly. I didn't open it. Didn't even touch it with my bare hands. I used a kitchen towel to carefully peel it off the door and drove it straight to Arthur's office. He opened it wearing latex gloves, like he was handling evidence in a criminal case. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mom talking about legacy and forgiveness and how my grandfather would be ashamed of the man I'd become. "This is manipulative as hell," Arthur said, shaking his head. "None of this is about his health or family values. It's all about getting you to respond, getting you to break." He added it to our file and told me we were building something solid, something that would hold up in court if we needed it to. The following Tuesday afternoon, I was leaving the museum when I saw a woman standing by my car in the parking lot. She was older, maybe mid-50s, and she smiled this warm, friendly smile when she saw me approaching. She introduced herself as Susan, Sarah's mom, and said she wanted to talk parent to parent about what was best for everyone. "I'm not a parent," I said clearly, and I unlocked my car and got in without looking at her. She leaned down toward my window and started saying something about understanding and compassion and how we all make mistakes. I started the engine and looked directly at her. "Don't contact me again," I said. Then I drove away and called Arthur from the car. He said we were building a strong case for restraining orders if we needed to escalate. Every incident like this just strengthened our position. That night, my friend Emily texted me. She's Sarah's cousin, but we stayed friendly after the divorce because she's always been straightforward and honest with me. "They're planning an intervention. They're going to try to ambush you somewhere. Just warning you," she wrote. I thanked her, told her I appreciated the heads up, and I realized something. Sitting there reading her message in my quiet house with Cooper sleeping on the couch, they weren't done. They were just getting started, and they genuinely believed if they just pushed hard enough, I would eventually break and give them what they wanted. The intervention was supposed to happen that Saturday at my parents' house. Emily gave me the details Friday night. They'd invited extended family and told everyone I was going through something serious and needed support. They'd even arranged for Sarah and Chloe to be there, probably assuming someone in the family would convince me to show up if they all ganged up together. I didn't go. I stayed home, spent the morning refinishing the stool in my garage. Around noon, Emily sent me updates from inside the house. Everyone's here. They're waiting. Your mom keeps checking her phone and looking at the door, she texted. Then 20 minutes later, Sarah's crying. Your dad looks angry. They're telling everyone you've changed and become cold. I read the messages, turned off my phone, and went back to sanding. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Them sitting in a living room, staging an emotional ambush, while I stood in my garage, doing exactly what I wanted to do with my Saturday. Sunday morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. The camera footage showed my mom's car pulling up at 7 a.m. Showed her getting out alone, looking around nervously, taping something to the door with shaking hands, then driving away quickly. I didn't touch it with my bare hands. I used a kitchen towel to carefully peel it off and drove it straight to Arthur's office without even opening it. He opened it wearing gloves, like always. Inside was a long letter from my mom talking about legacy and forgiveness and family history and how my grandfather would be ashamed of the man I'd become, how I was destroying the family over pride. This is manipulative as hell, he said, adding it to our growing file. This whole guilt-tripping about your grandfather? It's textbook emotional manipulation. We're filing for restraining orders this week. Monday afternoon, Michael called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable, kept adjusting his glasses, not quite making eye contact. My mom had called the museum that morning and told the receptionist I was having a serious mental health crisis, and Michael needed to check on me immediately. I could see he was trying to figure out if it was true, trying to balance concern for an employee with the obvious weirdness of the situation. I sat down. I explained the whole situation calmly and clearly, the divorce, the boundaries I'd set, the lawyer I'd hired, the documentation I had of every violation. Michael listened, nodded, and when I finished, he looked relieved. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. Do what you need to do. We'll support you. I called Arthur from my car in the parking lot, told him about the call to my workplace, and heard him typing furiously on his keyboard. That's harassment and potentially defamation. We're filing today, he said. And that same clarity from the first night settled over me again. The temporary restraining orders were granted Wednesday. Judge Davies looked at our documentation, the timeline we built, and signed them without much hesitation or questioning. Thursday morning, a process server delivered them to my parents' house. I wasn't there, but Emily heard from family members what happened and texted me the details. Your dad answered the door, read the papers, then crumpled them up and threw them on the ground. He's furious. Your mom's in tears. They're calling you unstable and telling everyone you need help. But the important thing was, they'd been served. They'd been officially notified. Any contact from this point forward would be a legal violation with real consequences. Friday afternoon, I was at the museum, finishing restoration work on a Ming Dynasty bowl when security called my extension. Your parents are in the lobby. They're saying it's a family emergency and they need to see you right now, the guard said, and I could hear my mom's voice in the background, getting louder and more frantic. I told him to call the police immediately. I told him they had active restraining orders and this was a direct violation, and I stayed at my desk while it all happened. Michael came by 10 minutes later and said they'd been escorted out by police. That they claimed my grandmother had fallen and was in the hospital dying. My grandmother died 6 years ago, I said, and Michael just shook his head in disbelief. The police gave them a warning for trespassing and violating the restraining order. They filed an official incident report, and I emailed a copy to Arthur that night. "This helps our case tremendously for permanent orders," he replied. The grocery store incident happened Sunday morning. I was buying coffee and eggs when I turned down the cereal aisle and saw Sarah standing there with Chloe sitting in the shopping cart. She froze when she saw me. Her face went completely pale, and I immediately pulled out my phone and started recording video. "You see me, you leave," I said clearly and calmly into the camera. I made sure to capture her face, the timestamp, the location, everything Arthur would need. She grabbed the cart and rushed toward the registers without saying a word. I saved the video, labeled it Exhibit C, and sent it to Arthur before I even finished checking out. Tuesday, Arthur called and said my mom had filed a counter-motion claiming I was having a psychological episode and that the restraining orders were based on my mental instability, not their actual behavior. "It's a Hail Mary," he said. "She has no medical records, no evidence, absolutely nothing to support this claim. The judge is going to see right through it." The hearing was scheduled for Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I took the day off work to prepare myself mentally. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Davies was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses. When I walked in, I saw my parents sitting on one side with Sarah positioned between them. It looked staged, carefully coordinated. This united front against me, designed to make me look like the unreasonable one. Arthur laid out our case methodically and professionally. He showed the timeline, starting from their first appearance on my porch, the screenshots, the voicemails, the camera footage, the police report from the museum, the grocery store video, the letter taped to my door. He showed the calls to my workplace, claiming I was mentally unstable, the manufactured emergency about my grandmother who died 6 years ago, the intervention I never agreed to attend. Judge Davies listened carefully, took detailed notes, and when Arthur finished, she looked directly at my mom. "Do you have medical records supporting your claim that your son is psychologically unstable?" My mom stammered. Said she was just concerned as a mother. Said a mother knows when something's wrong with her child. Judge Davies cut her off mid-sentence. "Not liking one's family isn't a mental illness," she said firmly, and I watched my dad's face turn bright red. Judge Davies granted permanent restraining orders for 3 years. No direct contact, no indirect contact, no third-party contact allowed. Violations would result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. She looked at my parents when she said it, made absolutely sure they understood the seriousness and consequences. Then she dismissed the court. I walked out without looking back. Arthur shook my hand in the hallway and said I'd done everything right. I drove home in complete silence. 3 months later, my life looks exactly like I wanted it to look. I go to work. I restore ceramics that have been broken for centuries. I refinish furniture on weekends. I take Cooper camping with my friend Jake when the weather's nice. I updated my emergency contacts at work to remove my parents completely. I revised my will to leave everything to charity, specifically arts education programs and a domestic violence shelter that helps people escape toxic family situations. My parents are strangers now. Sarah is someone I used to know in another life. And the peace I have isn't the fake kind I used to pretend existed at family dinners. It's real. It's solid. It's mine. Sometimes, the healthiest and most courageous thing you can do is recognize when a relationship, even with the people who raised you, has no structural integrity left to save. What would you have done in my situation?